Today on Open Up and Speak, I have Laura with Healing to Happy. And Laura is an IBS specialist. So, for those who don't know what IBS is, it's a stomach condition. And I'm sure Laura will get into some more detail with us about that. Irritable bowel syndrome is what it stands for. And she's also a nutrition consultant. So, she's the type of person that you can go to and get some good information from if you're dealing with any type of issues with your bowels or other health issues that would have to do with hormonal imbalances and things like that. So, welcome, Laura, to Open Up and Speak today.
Thank you so much for having me.
How are you?
I am doing good. I just
Good.
moved and I feel like I'm finally getting settled here.
Oh, okay. Where are you at?
I just moved to Dallas.
Oh, okay. I've been to Dallas actually. It's a nice city.
Hmm.
All right. Well, we will go ahead and get started. I wanted to ask you. I know a little bit about your history just from reading your bio, and we kind of chatted a little bit previous to the podcast a couple of different times. And I know that you had some issues with hormonal imbalances. You were getting like rashes on your face and having all kinds of stomach things going on. So I wanted to ask you, what did you end up doing? What was the process that got you to where you are now?
Yeah, so it was a lot of face plants and lesson learned. I'm not even like, because at the time I had struggled with IBS since I was 13 and I just felt that, and then it gave me a really disordered relationship to food, and along that path I ended up malnourishing myself because of my eating disorder. And
Mhm.
so along that it was just like, okay, so what do I do? And it became this whole thing of food fear and not giving myself the right nutrients. And once I was able to break free from that and understand it's more so about the foods you're adding in as opposed to the foods you're taking out, I was
Okay.
able to balance everything moving forward.
So give me an example of something that you were adding in rather than taking out.
Meat, organ meats, things like that, functional foods, omega-3 fatty acids, making sure I was paying attention to my polyunsaturated intake, fat
Okay.
intake, make all those kind of things that I really like. Even though I was studying health and nutrition, I was so focused
Okay.
on like fiber and all that kind of stuff. I wasn't paying
Right.
attention to actual nourishing foods of organs that I needed to actually be replenishing.
Okay. And I think that's pretty common. A lot of times we think, get rid of gluten or get rid of dairy or get rid of this. And then, which can be helpful, especially if somebody's having a food allergy or their body is just not, able to break down and process those foods. But at the same time, like you were just saying, then sometimes we're now eliminating certain proteins and certain things from our diet that are still important for our body to have. So that's a great point that you mentioned that. What were you experiencing? Like, I guess if somebody's trying to figure out if they have IBS or irritable bowel syndrome, what would you tell them as far as what did that look like for you?
Yeah. So it started out for me at 13. I was just constipated. Like I remember my mom standing outside the bathroom, like singing a song, like totally thought this was normal. And it wasn't. As I got older, it just got to be worse and worse. And instead of constipation, it started to grow with like abdominal pain and
Mhm.
chronic bloating that was actually very painful. It wasn't just like, oh, this is embarrassing, but like it was super painful. I was passing gas. Like I would, at the time I was teaching English and I would just blame it on my students, but like totally not cool to do.
You have a
Uh,
dog nearby. You're like, oh, the dog
yeah,
is
yeah,
really.
oh my God. They're just acting up. It's them. Like horrible. And then it started to progress from there. And then I started to have hormonal issues. My cycle was gone for 5 years. My hair started falling out. My skin started flaring up. And then I started to really start, like, my anxiety and depression just skyrocketed. And these were something that were my baseline, they were my normal. But that's when I started to pay more attention because I was like, okay, like I can handle constipation because that was my normal, right?
Hmm.
Not normal, common.
Yeah.
But that was my baseline. But then it started to really start impacted everything around me, and then it started like impact my relationships because I was afraid of everything and just grew from there. So anyone that is struggling with IBS or thinks they have IBS, the first thing you want to do is one, keeping a food journal so that you can kind of understand what your food intake is beyond just like calories and macros and all that kind of stuff you see on the internet nowadays, but actually getting to like, when are your symptoms happening, what foods are you commonly eating at what times, how often, getting the variety, is it simple, what have you, is it enough, and then being able to go to a specialist, so not just your GP but actually a GI doctor, and from there you'll go through a series of tests that will start to rule things out. So making sure that you don't have like some type of parasites or Crohn's or SIBO or something like that. And basically by the end of it, they're going to be like, we don't know what's wrong with you. Here's IBS. And that's what IBS
Yeah.
is. It's just, we don't know what's wrong with you.
Yeah, that's so frustrating. There are so many, um, I feel like there's so many medical conditions where that's just what they do. It's like they rule out everything else and then they go, well, we know it's not these five things. So here you go. Good luck. And a lot of times they don't even have any way of helping you. They're just like, good luck, and you leave there and you're like, now what do I do? And you feel so frustrated and overwhelmed. Well, I'm glad that you are talking about this because I did not know a lot about your history, but when I was in my 20s, I guess like my late 20s, I had my daughter at 27. And right after having my daughter, well, not right after, but they give you like 6 weeks or 8 weeks after you go to the doctor after having a baby. And they say, okay, you can start exercising and you can start doing your normal routine and lifting things and whatever. So I started getting really into like Pilates and I started exercising pretty regularly and trying to get myself back into good shape. And then I noticed that I had started having all of these really weird bladder pains, like kind of reminded me of like what IBS was, but for your bladder. And I
Mm-hmm.
could not figure out what was going on. And in my early 20s, I thought it was just like stress and stuff because what you just explained, I have dealt with off and on like my whole life with just like, I guess we're getting into a little TMI here today for the people that are listening. Like, we do not want to know about your bowels, but I always just thought it was normal too. Like, okay, maybe I'm just not eating enough. I'm trying to drink more water. So, maybe that's just where the constipation comes from or whatever. And then things kind of leveled out after my early 20s. I was okay for a while. Then, like I said, I had my daughter, and then it turned into this like really painful. It felt like somebody was like, I don't know. It felt as if somebody were stabbing me in my bladder, is what it felt like. I don't really know how to explain it. And then they said, "Oh, we think you have." They gave me a couple different things and they said, we think you have interstitial cystitis, which is kind of like what you just said, where they rule everything else out. They stick tubes up your bladder. And it was so painful. It felt like I had a chronic urinary tract infection, except there was no infection. And so eventually what I figured out was that certain things that I was taking, like certain supplements and things that I was taking, were actually irritating my bladder, and that the exercises, the Pilates and the stuff I was doing also was, for whatever reason, was irritating the lower, region of my pelvic, area. And I ended up just kind of backing off from those things. But it was really difficult to figure out what it was that was triggering it. And at the time, the only medication they had was just some, like, it was so expensive. I don't even remember exactly how much it was, but I want to say it was like $400 a month for this medication. And I was like, there's no way I'm paying $400 a month for this medication. And of course, now, all these years later, I think I took it for a month when they gave me like a month's supply of it in the beginning for free to try. And now there's like all these side effects from the medication. People are having, I think, macular degeneration and eye problems. So I was like, oh, I'm glad I didn't take that medication for more than a month. But in any case, is really hard sometimes to figure out what's going on. And in my family, you mentioned the whole thyroid thing. We have a history on my mom's side with my grandmother and my mom both having had Graves' disease. And Graves' disease is a really hard one because with hypothyroidism, when your thyroid is going too slow, there are a lot of things you can do to help speed your thyroid up. But when your thyroid's going too fast, there really are not a lot of things you can do to slow it down. And so medication is usually what they try first. And then if that doesn't work, they end up cutting your thyroid out, which is pretty scary. So I'm going to tie that in now to let you talk about, I'd love to hear your experience with that and what was going on with your thyroid. I know you were on the opposite side of that, but I'd like to hear your experience with that.
Yeah, so mine was bouncing around after being so long in a calorie deficit because of my IBS and being in this food fear. My body started to attack itself because I wasn't eating enough of the right food. So it got into this chronic state of fight or flight. So that started at
Mhm.
my internal thermostat, which is our thyroid. And so
Yeah.
mine basically started to eat itself and sped it up super fast. And that's when I lost crazy amount of weight and all this kind of stuff. And then it would go really slow, or vice versa. And then it wasn't reuptaking. And my fault was that I wasn't doing the research of looking at what tests they were taking and making sure I was getting a full panel. So when
Yeah.
you're going and getting your TSH taken in your thyroid panel, you have to get reverse T3, reverse T4, TSH, cortisol, all these kind of different kind of tests that I now know and preach and teach and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff, because I wasn't getting them. And so I kept getting these results of like, everything's fine. We don't really know, like, other than your cortisol, like everything's fine. And I was like, well, okay, then what? Right. And then it wasn't until I went to a functional doctor and I started learning about this stuff. And then I myself went back to school to start learning this stuff. I was like, this whole time, like, you guys could have been like, and this is where it's our power to be our own health advocate, to do the work when we know something is wrong, to
Yeah.
keep digging deeper. And that's where
Yeah.
my kind of went. And so that's when I started, I was like, okay, so what is at the root? Why is my body fighting itself? Okay, so where can we start to add things in? And this is when I started to look at things from an organ to organ approach, and looking more at, okay, so what am I doing? Oh, I'm stressed. Okay, this whole gut brain dysregulation, that's what led me down that rabbit hole. And then metabolic function, that's what led me down that rabbit hole. And can combine the two to really get me back on my way. And now I don't take any medication. I mean, I take some like multivitamins, but I don't take any
Yeah.
medications. I don't take anything like that. And that's the course of my work now, is to get people to understand, okay, when these things are happening, it's a symptom, it is not the cause, right? And
Right.
so when you can start to actually get to the root cause as opposed to symptom management, you're able
Right.
to start moving forward.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that you brought up the whole thing about the thyroid panel, because that the thyroid is something that is so misdiagnosed, and a lot of times it goes undiagnosed for so long that by the time people actually get a proper diagnosis, their symptoms are like off the charts. They're bad. It's trying to reverse it is just a huge ordeal. And so I appreciate that you brought that up. My thyroid actually became slightly enlarged. It still is on the right side when I was pregnant with my second child at 30. And I have, I guess, what they call a slight goiter there now. I have a couple of small nodules on there, but whenever I get it checked, they always say that it looks healthy and it looks fine. My blood work always comes back fine. And I don't have a ton of symptoms. So they usually just say, we're not going to treat you with anything because there's not, it's still your thyroid's still functioning fine. However, I don't know how old you are, but I'm going to be 45 this summer. And I've reached that point where, yeah, what you just said, like my periods are not coming regularly anymore the last couple of years, um, which I know is normal, and it can happen in your 40s and stuff like that. But your body does go through all these changes, and it is hard to know when you're going through hormonal things whether or not there's a medical condition underlying there, or is it just, is it something health related? And another thing that the endocrinologist told me when I went to the endocrinologist years ago, he said, I was under a lot of stress at that time, and he said, you are going to create a thyroid problem if you continue to stress yourself out. And I was like, what? He said, no, I'm serious. He was from the islands and he had this like really cool accent, but I won't try to copy it. But he just had this really like laid back, and he's like, yeah, you've gotta relax. He said, I don't care what you have to do, but your stress levels and the way you tolerate stress also manifest in the thyroid. And that kind of is like your control center, like you were just saying. It's kind of the control center for the hormones and the regulation of the temperature of the body and all these things. And so he gave me a little talking to that day. I was like, whatever you do, you need to first and foremost, try to find ways to get yourself relaxed and to calm down, because you're only going to make this spiral. And I was like, okay, okay. And so I did at that point try to start doing some things to help ease my mind. And even him just saying that actually was weird, but it did kind of ease my mind a little bit to know that I did have some control over what was going on in my body.
That's exactly what happened with me as well, when it was pertaining to my IBS and my thyroid and my cortisol, all that kind of stuff together. I was talking with my functional doctor as well as my naturopath. And so her name was Penny, and she like looked at me and she was like, do you want to, after like the final breakdown of like, what the heck is wrong with me? Like, I don't know. I've been doing everything. I study this. I help everyone else. Like, what the heck is wrong with me? It was one of those moments. And she's like, do you want to talk about how your depression is linked to all of it? And I was like, excuse me? One, what do you mean I'm depressed? Like, this was again something I was used to. I was like, what? Even though I was
Yeah.
diagnosed at 13, I had been 10, 13, 14 plus years. I was like, this is just normal.
Right, right.
And it was that moment I was like, oh, and that's what led me down this rabbit hole of the whole gut brain connection and understanding how at the root, this is how everything works. And when we can actually get everything under control, the body will respond in a positive way. But if we're continued in this fight or flight, stressing out, over dieting, over exercising, over supplementing, all this kind of stuff, we are not letting this messenger, right? Because the symptoms at the root are just this messenger trying to catch up to us. And it's like, hey, I have this really important message to you. And you're like, nah, and you like take some supplements and like do something else. And then you're like, is finally when he comes up, he's like, oh, this message, like you just needed this food, or you were missing this part, or you needed to learn how to breathe from your belly, like stimulate your vagus nervous system, like or vagus nerve, like all this kind of stuff is like, oh, that's all you wanted all these years. That's all you wanted.
You just made it sound so simple. Yeah, and I have a friend who is also like, I think she's in her late 40s, and she just had her father just died. She's gone through a lot of stress just over the last couple of years with her parents' health issues and things. And she just went through what you were just talking about with hypothyroidism, and her doctor basically told her to like cut all these foods out. And I'm like, I said, I get where they're going with it with the gluten and all this stuff. And she's having IBS symptoms too. So I'm actually going to send her over your way after the podcast. And she listens to my podcast, so hopefully she'll get to hear some of the things that you're talking about on here. But that was my fear was, you start to, eliminate, and I know she's always had a sensitivity to dairy because I've known her for a long time, but now she's eliminating gluten and sugar and all of these things out of her diet. And I'm like, and she's lost a bunch of weight, but what's going to happen is she's going to push herself into hyperthyroidism because her thyroid's going to go on overdrive from this, like you said, starvation mode. And so then that's going to create another issue. So anyway, I'm happy that you're on the show because I know that you're going to be able to help her too. And I'm really interested in finding out some more about what you did. So, it sounds like you took a very holistic approach to your health. Are there any tips or things or supplements or I don't know, whatever that you would recommend to the audience, things that you would say, this is where you start. This is, this is kind of like the, step 1, 2, 3, whatever, just to give people kind of an idea of where they could begin.
Yeah, let's keep it super simple because honestly, when you look up anything with IBS, it is literally like someone is holding a hose to your face and you can't breathe because there's just so much. So that's like the visual I always get. It's just like, please stop. But the first thing, so I teach the free method, FREE. So the first method or step in the method is the foundations, which is what I touched on earlier is get your journal. A lot of us were like, oh, I have IBS, and instantly we're cutting out foods. We're doing this. We're quick to jump on this like low FODMAP elimination restriction kind of jive before we even know what's going on with us, before we even know what food is the root issue, because food is not the issue, right? It's why is the body not digesting food to begin with? And we can't be so quick to do, okay, so how do I do this? It's no. Why are we doing this? And how do we apply that to our life? That's the method. You can't just go straight to the how. So first is coming in with that food journal. And I know it sounds tedious and it's annoying. And so first do that. Are you getting the right ratio? Are you getting of fiber to insoluble fiber? Are you getting enough healthy fats and proteins and carbs and all these delicious things? With majority of people that have gut issues, they don't eat enough carbs. And I'm not talking about like the processed grains and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about like fruits and like potatoes and all these kind of actual whole foods. That's what I'm talking about here. Yeah. And getting to the root of that. And then you're able to actually come full force. And this not only gives you your power back because you're being in line with yourself and you know what's working and paying attention to when your symptoms actually arise. But you can then go to your GI specialist, not your GP, because your GP is just general practitioner. They don't specialize in this. You're going to go to your GP and you can do an analysis, because when it comes to matters of the gut, you need to test, not guess. I see way too many times people just jumping on being like, oh, I read something on the internet and it sounds like I have candida. I'm going to go on this candida cleanse. And I'm like, please stop. Or like same thing with like SIBO, or same thing with like parasites. And those cleanses, you want to avoid them at all costs unless you need them. Like they're so intense.
They're harsh.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm glad that you're saying that too, because so many people do jump on that bandwagon of doing these cleanses. And we need a certain amount of like, there's good bacteria in our bodies too. And a lot of times people don't realize that there is good bacteria that's supposed to be there. And when you start flushing out those, you do those candida flushes and you do all these different things, you are flushing out some of the good stuff that needs to be in your GI tract. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out
Exactly.
too.
Like,
Yeah.
well, the thing is that we need to stop demonizing bad bacteria. We always have good and bad bacteria. It's
Yeah.
when the stomach acid gets too low that the body is now out of balance. Okay. So
Yes.
we as humans, we are made up of parasites. We are made up of yeast. We have candy. We have all these things
Right.
inside of us. Like, that's just
We're
a
walking
no,
bacteria.
yeah, like, ooh, gross. Like, we want to like shame it and like try and clean it and what have you. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, like, actually, this is what makes us us. This is what gives us everything in our life. It's not
Right.
the bacteria that's the issue, is why is this bacteria all of a sudden having a party? That's
Hmm.
the issue. But we spend so much time, oh, it has to be this and eliminating that and all this kind of stuff. So
Right.
once you go and you get all these tests done, where you're probably going to see, oh, you have some yeast overgrowth and you have this there, but at least it's not like Crohn's or SIBO or something that is actually needs medical attention. And then you'll get some type of diagnosis. And that's when you step into R, which is the reprogram. Because the cool thing about all this bacteria is you can reprogram it. They're really, really smart. Like, think of like Pac-Man. It's like
Okay.
it's eating it, and then it eats it, and then it turns it into something magical. And that's when it like turns, like gets really big and it's like, like that kind of thing. That's what it is. And so you can reprogram these things that can take up these little microvilli. You can retrain them so that it's actually good bacteria again. But that comes through understanding and exploring, which is the next E. So then you're going to be exploring other options. And that's when you don't like low FODMAP and things of that nature. Like that, you need to link arms with someone that actually gets it. I see way too often people doing this as a long-term solution. You are
Doing
not
what?
supposed low FODMAP dieting to
Oh,
heal IBS
okay.
or what have you, and manage symptoms, because that's safe. But that is so restrictive to your microbiome. It really, the long-term damage, this is why it it's a mission of
Yeah.
mine to really just put it to bed, because again, it's symptom management. It's not actually getting to a solution. And two, it's it's not supposed to be done for more than 21 days if you do need to take that approach. And
Right.
people are doing it, like, I can't tell you how many times people, oh, I've been doing this for like 10 years. I'm like, you've been doing what? Like,
Yeah.
like, please don't do that. And then you start to explore the options, and this is where you start to evolve your life, which is the next E. And so the first part is the foundations. You need to understand what's going on with your body and understanding, okay, so this is what's going on, going through the self analysis of, so you know what's going on. And then you start to link arms or outsource or what have you for someone else. But you can't do that step first. Like, they don't know your body. They may
Yeah.
come in and they be like, hey, here's your medication, or here's this or that thing, but you're just like, no, like, that's not going to work for me. Or like, now it's low FODMAP and you're like, what do I do? Like, I don't, that's not my arena. Like, then what do I eat? And it's like, okay, but like, do you know what you're eating and you like to eat, and how can you vibrate that to what these kind of methods and modalities are?
Yeah.
Does that kind of make
Well,
sense?
yeah, and I'm a big, first of all, I will, and I've said this on other podcasts, my children have given me permission to talk about their disorders and things, so nothing that I'm sharing is secret here. My daughter had suffered with an eating disorder for a couple of years, and she's, she still has her moments for sure. I mean, we're not over it, but but that was always my fear, was, are we going to be eliminating things, even bad carbs? I don't even go with bad and good anymore. I've kind of almost eliminated everything. I'm like, pizza's fine, like everything is fine. It's just, are we conscious of what we're eating? Are we conscious of the relationship that we have with food and all that stuff? And so I've become a really big advocate, after we saw a nutritionist, of just eating everything, of course, in moderation, but everything is good. A Twinkie is obviously not the best, maybe the best choice to eat all day long. But if you have one, if you have a donut, I mean, it's not going to kill you. Like you said, if you're eating a balanced diet regularly and you know what you're putting in your body, then these things in the long run are not going to hurt you. So I'm very much in line with what you're saying. And I think that we've gone in a very dangerous direction, where we're actually pushing people into eating disorders in the name of health. And
Mm-hmm.
that is more frightening to me than anything, as a mom of a teenager who I've seen suffer with an eating disorder. It is, I can't even tell you the amount of trauma of watching somebody suffer like that. So to me, I love what you're saying, because it really aligns with what we've been told, through with the nutritionist, and through therapists that we've seen and stuff like that, that we need to be conscious that we're not, and you said this earlier, you were eating out of fear. You were also, not eating out of fear. And so when we do that, it's not balanced. When we have feelings about our food and there's a negative relationship there, even if you think that you're doing something to be healthy, sometimes you're actually being counterproductive. And I know it sounds weird. It sounds so weird when I talk to people and they're like, no, gluten's bad for you and dairy and all. And I'm like, okay, it is bad for some people. It's bad for people that have celiac. It's bad for, like you said, it's bad if you have, food allergies or, whatever. But it's not bad for everybody. And if you don't know that you're having food allergies or you haven't been to a doctor to diagnose yourself to get a diagnosis, then you're just playing Russian roulette. Like you said earlier, you're playing a guessing game and you could technically be screwing yourself up worse by kind of doing this whole thing of making certain bacteria higher or lower than they should be. And then now you're just spinning your wheels.
Exactly. You touched on two important things there that I kind of want to circle back to is one, food allergy. So too often I'm seeing these food sensitivity kits that are giving people eating disorder, right? Because they have
Hmm.
this food fear. And the
Yeah.
thing about these home food sensitivity kits is, and I did an entire thing on this, they're just trash. They don't give you the right answer because you don't know most people are going to see on it. They're going to get these tests back and they're going to get, oh, it's everything I eat. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, now what? And that's because a healthy body has an IgG reaction. You have a reaction to food. That's what happens. You're turning food to fuel. And that's why you often see these types of foods showing up on your thing. So
Oh,
I do think that this will be the future of medicine. It is just way too new right now for
okay.
people to be doing this at home by themselves and then self-diagnosing.
Yeah.
You can't do
Well,
that.
I'm glad that you brought that up because those are really common now. You can order them online and you
Oh,
can you can
no.
test all kinds of stuff, And people, like you said, everyone thinks they're a doctor now, right? They're like self-diagnosing. Oh my
Oh
gosh,
my God.
everything I eat I'm allergic to, and then now they're flipping a switch and not eating anything that they should be eating, and so yeah,
I'm
I
like,
get
what
what you're
did I
saying.
do?
And what
And
was
then
the second one?
the second one was we were talking about food fear and what this has to
Yeah.
do with our body. So what happens in like this section of what I've learned is this whole gut brain connection, right? And so when you are stressing, you are not digesting because our gut and our brain are in constant communication through this thing called the vagus nerve. So it's the enteric nervous system. You don't have to tell it to function. You don't have to tell your heart to beat, your lungs to breathe, your food to digest, any of that kind of stuff. But when you're in this state of fight or flight, this is when
Hmm.
back in the day, our body used to think a saber-toothed tiger was coming to us. So the things we needed was our survival organs to be going, and we needed to be able to book it, which means all of our blood flow is going to our brain and our muscles and our heart. It is not
Okay.
going to digest our foods or make babies, because if there's a saber-toothed tiger or a famine happening, you don't need to poop because you don't need to eliminate waste, and you definitely don't need to be producing children because another mouth to feed. So these are the two things that are always shut down when we're in this state. So you hit the nail on the head of, even if you're eating that healthy kale salad with all the healthy fats and woo, like doing
Yeah.
the whole thing, you're not going to digest it because you're too busy in your cerebral brain and your blood flow's going here. You're worried about work. You're worried about trauma. Like this is where the body keeps the score. And there's all these kind of things. Sorry, I'm speaking really fast because I get so hyped about this.
No, you're
But
I love you. You're great. You're
I'm
great.
like,
Keep going.
I'm so
I should have
happy.
brought
Like
pom
this
poms. I could be like cheering you right now.
it's like my hype moment because people like this is something that it's not spoken enough about. We're so quick to just go, oh, like what supplement, what diet, what all this kind of stuff. But it's like, are you
Right.
calm? Like, do you actually chew your food? And I'm not talking about like the 30 thing because who has time to chew their food 30 times? Like I'm not doing that.
No, but you're
But
right. You're right.
it's
I will tell you, like at work, I get a 30-minute break and I can't tell you how many times like I just like scarf my food down real quick. And I'm like, why am I doing that? Why am I literally like shoveling food in my mouth? Like, if I don't eat it right now, it's going to go somewhere? So you're right. We don't take time to sit and eat and digest our food and enjoy it. And I'll tell you, I have suffered, I don't anymore, but this is recent and it's because I went to a holistic doctor. I suffered from acid reflux. Really, honestly, probably from the time I was pregnant with my daughter at 27. And I was born with acid reflux. My mom, and so was my daughter. My mom has told me all these stories about how I would vomit after I ate and all this stuff when I was a baby. And my daughter had the same issue. But it's like it comes back. It's like your body, as you get older, it starts to change again and you kind of start to go back to that. So when that happened, I was taking all these over the counter things and they would work for a short period of time, then they wouldn't work. And it was just so irritating. And I went to a holistic doctor and I spent a little chunk of change on this doctor that I didn't really want to. But I was like, I'm going to do it because I don't want to keep living like this. And I have been taking this supplement and it's got like pepsin in it and it's like a digestive enzyme and it's some sort of acid. I cannot remember the name of it, but it has been absolutely wonderful. And I do not go to bed at night anymore with acid reflux. It's been months. I have not had acid reflux. This is the first time in almost probably over, it's been probably about, gosh, I mean, honestly, it's probably been 17, 18 years that I have not had to go to bed at night with acid reflux. So, again, I'm not saying that that's for everybody because I'm not a doctor, but I went, to a holistic doctor and we talked about it and he told me how to work the regimen and how to know whether I was taking enough or too much or not enough. And so yeah, you're totally right. We don't, the stress of things and that was one of the first questions he asked me too is, what's your stress level like? How do you deal with stress? What things are you doing? And all of that is intermingled. It's all related. It's all, we're all going to go through hormonal changes in our lives because that's going to happen. But how we go through those can obviously be a little bit uglier if we're not aware of some of the things that we can be doing to help kind of offset the edge of that.
Exactly. It's because that's what happened with me as well. It was after I unexpectedly lost my mom, that's what set my entire alarm system off in my body, that I had
Mm,
no idea this is what was going on, because it was one of the things where I was like, oh, like constipation, that's manageable, take some Miralax, get over it,
right.
right? Like, but then trauma happened. Then my body went into this fight or flight survival mode, and then I perpetuated the cycle by then chasing every diet out there or restricting or
Right.
medication, instead of being like, no, you're in a trauma response, like calm
Yeah.
down, deal with that and heal, right? And that comes from letting your body know it's okay. And this is why it's always, yeah, it's going to probably cause you a chunk of change, like you said, but it's one of the things.
Yeah.
And like exactly what you said is like, I don't want to live this way anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like things are manageable until they're not. And
Yeah,
that's when you're like,
absolutely.
oh my goodness, like I
And
need to make a change.
yeah, and that's what happens. We usually wait too long. So I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate all your insight. We're gonna basically get ready to close out. So I just wanted to add the last couple minutes if you wanted to put in a plug for your website and your business and what you do. I will obviously put all of this in the notes at the end of the show as well. So when we're finished, I always tell everyone just send me over whatever you want me to put into the podcast notes, but go for it.
Sure. So anyone wants to come say hello, I am most active over on Instagram, which is at Laura_H2H. And from there, just everything in the bio, it literally gives you step 1 through like 8 of what best fits you, how you can get started. We have free trainings, downloads. I have one-on-one coaching. I have online courses. I have master classes. It's any arena of where you're at in your healing, there is definitely something there for you. So just starting at Instagram, I feel like giving one thing is always the easiest way. It's
Yeah.
just like, come hang out. I'm always in there leaving voice notes. Like, don't be
Yeah.
shy.
Yes, you are. And you do a great job. Thank you so much for coming on. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. It's hard for us to talk about, body function and our health and our mental health. And that's really the whole purpose of the podcast for me is just this is all intermingled, our brains, our feelings, our gut, our feet, whatever, all of it. It's all, all of the stuff that we have pain and that we deal with it's all interconnected. And so I always feel so grateful when I have people like yourself come on here and who are looking at things from a very holistic approach. And so thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Have a
All
good
right.
rest of your
You
day.
too, honey. Have a good night.